Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Going to start off with, obviously, it is 9/11, and 22 years ago today, to me, seems like it was yesterday, to be honest. Everyone I've talked to today, same kind of feeling, knew where we were, what we were doing, who we were doing it with, what we were talking about. It seems burnt into our memories, into our minds, into who we are. And I'll tell you, I remember, every detail of the day. I was back home in Cleveland. My grandmother was having a knee replacement done. We were at the Cleveland Clinic. I woke up unnaturally early that day, and it was like everyone says, it was a bright, beautiful, amazing day. The kind of day that you don't forget often, but not the kind of day you associate with the most tragic event of a lifetime. And I remember, clearly we were around our family, everyone was there, and I remember at the moment that the news came on the TV, what we were talking about, because we were busting each other's shoes as families do. And I remember the moment it happened. You could see the faces, the sorrow, the dismay, the confusion. And as the day went on, as the day unfolded, the anger and the division that then became. And that's one of those things that has stuck with me, because I was in a place, the Cleveland Clinic is a very diverse environment. Virtually people, it's like the United Nations, if you will, because it's an extraordinarily large teaching hospital. And in those hours that I was in that place, because we were there morning to night, you could see already us tearing apart. And, I couldn't help that day, while my grandmother was in surgery, because while it was going on, she was under the knife, thinking this was someone who Pearl Harbor changed her life. That was their generation. And for her to go to sleep and wake up with another Pearl Harbor type attack in her lifetime, what that meant. And then, we talked pretty much the whole time she was out about that, because a lot of my family members had military backgrounds, and immediately the older ones, her brother was like, this is an attack. This is, and he focused right in on that. And we talked about, what is this going to mean? Who is it? And everyone, went to where eventually we figured out it was. And watching the behavior of people is something I'm never going to forget. And in those hours that my grandmother was under the knife, we talked about what the changes to the country were going to be. And it seems so eerie to me now. And I think about this every year on this day, how right we were, that this was ultimately was going to bring us together immediately. But long term, this was going to rip us apart, because you could already see the divisions. We weren't the homogenous country that the World War II generation was. We were a much more diverse country even then, because you could see the reactions of the people in the hospital. I remember two people of kind of Middle Eastern descent, talking to each other and going, "Did you do that?" And it was not funny. And I remember thinking, how are we going to get past this? I remember driving home afterwards and gas prices going up to like $9 a gallon. Obviously, the city of Cleveland came back the next day and said, you go undo all of that damage you did. But that night, that's what it was. And that gave way to color-coded fear, if you remember. Remember the Tom Ridge, the color codes, the red for severe, the orange for high, and we were orange a lot. The yellow for elevated, the blue for guarded. And if it was green, it was low. It was rarely green, as I remember. Always throwing us in the yellow and the orange to keep people on edge. And that gave way to coded language then. You know, radical, Islamic, extremist, terrorist, all those words meant to incite to anger, to pit us against, because war. Now look, I go back and I say I was all in favor of going into Afghanistan after bin Laden. 100%. You had me at, we're going to go get the people who did this. I get revenge. I get retribution. I get that 100%. And was all in favor. And I take responsibility for being all in favor of going, yeah, go get him. Whatever we need to do, whatever we have at our disposal, you go get those criminals, you go get those people, and you hold them accountable. However, I'm not a death penalty person, but you know what? If that's what happens, that's what happens. Then we made this bizarre turn. Got to go to Iraq. It's 100% against that. Again, tearing at the country, tearing us apart. And ever since then, it's been slicing and dicing. You know, I put out on Facebook today, I go, you know, everyone remembers where they were today. Everyone remembers what they were doing and who they were talking to. Everyone who was alive. But do you remember yesterday? Do you remember what the country was like on the 10th? Do you remember not being divided as much? Do you remember not being as fearful? Do you remember being not as hateful? Because they used that masterfully, to pit us against one another and everyone else. And globally, that response. Because look, I wasn't alone in get bin Laden after 9/11. I was not alone in this. The country was basically unified. Go get them. But we made that turn. And we destabilized that whole region of the world. And we've destabilized the world because of it. I'm curious where folks were, what they were doing, what their thoughts on this day are. It's one of those things that, you know, it's hard to explain. But my fear at the time, and I talked about this quite extensively at that point. We're going to send people into harm's way. Because I remember watching those men come back from Vietnam. And we're not going to take care of them. And you look what we did to the 9/11 responders. How long it took to get them the funding that they needed. How long it took to get the VA budget and money and we still don't have all of it. The rich got richer. The poor got poorer. And I remember at the time, you know, when we went into Iraq talking about Smedley Butler and the war is a racket, the rich get richer and the poor get dead frames. And here we are. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Again, I go back to this, just being ripped apart. And again, look, I look at the Republican Party, and it's amazing to me that in this moment, you've got Republicans defending the Saudis, and the picture of Trump with his hand on the orb with the Saudis, and the coziness there, the money Elon Musk probably got for Twitter. I mean, there's a lot. There is a lot here. Let's go to the phone lines. Got Steve on line 1 from Chicago. Steve, how are you?
Fine, thank you. And I think that this is, as you pointed out, one of those seminal events in a generation's history. There are various times that define each generation. For some, it was Pearl Harbor. Others, they will ask themselves, where were you when you heard that Kennedy was shot? And then, moving forward, the generation that for whom 9/11 happened, whether you were in elementary school, high school, college, or in the working world. I was in downtown Chicago, living in one of those high rises, 21st floor to ceiling windows, and behind my television set was the Sears Tower. You could see it in the background because I was living downtown. And the whole time watching the coverage, and like everyone else, I thought, okay, well, a plane hit the first building. I mean, that could be anything. I mean, how long was it before a plane was going to end up hitting a high rise somewhere? But, as soon as that second plane came in, you said, holy, you're like, what? Look how big that thing is. And as soon as it hit, you knew right then and there, like everyone else did, okay, this is not an accident. And then we all started to look up. My friends who were in the neighborhood, we'd call each other, okay, I mean, John Hancock Building, Sears Tower, and then we came to find many months and years later that they actually had planned to target the Sears Tower. But that never came to fruition. But as you pointed out, we then sold the American public because, like every war, people get scared and then they get angry and they want to lash out, and you can sell them on anything. And then the American people just didn't want to make the distinction. I am no fan of the Taliban, but the Taliban were not Al Qaeda, and they had no designs outside of Afghanistan. They had allowed Al Qaeda refuge in Afghanistan. And for those people who don't know it, they were willing to give them up to us to keep us out of their country. But that wasn't good enough for us, apparently. And so obviously we need to prosecute that war. And you can have a debate as to whether or not we belong there post 9/11. That there is a debate to be had there. There is no debate to be had with regard to trying to create the dubious relationship between 9/11 and the need to invade Iraq. It was just ridiculous, but that's how that war was sold, and we all know it. And unfortunately, the Fourth Estate and a lot of other people who were supposed to be the watchdogs in this democracy, this constitutional republic, were asleep at the wheel or just afraid to say anything. There were a few people who did, but by and large, they were drowned out. And and we're going to be paying the price for those wars for decades to come, because the people who died there, we're going to be supporting their families. The people who were hurt physically, we're going to be supporting them. And that mental trauma doesn't go away. This was the longest war that we had ever fought in this country's history. And that means you had a whole generation. You could have fought in that war, had a child, that child could have gone off and fought in the same war. And in some cases that happened. That's how long we're going to be paying for this many, many years down the road. And so we need to consider that every time we think about prosecuting the war somewhere, not just what it's going to cost today, but what it's going to cost 30, 40, 50 years from now. Because 20-year-olds become 70 and 80-year-olds. And when they need the VA and they need other services, you have to pay for that. So is it worth it, and who's willing to pay that bill? And that's not even, taking into consideration the lives that were taken overseas prosecuting the war. And I'm not one of these people who believes that, the United States should not defend itself. Absolutely, there are enemies out there, and there are times when it's necessary to use the military to defend this country's interests and to defend our national security. But at the same time, there are times when, in the name of doing that, we have committed wholesale slaughter. And what we did to Iraq as a country, I mean, it's almost unforgivable. And let's face it, we knew full well what was going to happen. And the idea that you're going to bomb somebody into the Stone Age and then you're going to publicly announce, oh, by the way, we're now engaged in the process of nation building. I mean, that is a multi-generational commitment of trillions upon trillions of dollars. And, I mean, so what is the plan here? We're going to go from country to country doing this? Because that essentially would have been the formula if we had decided to go down this route indefinitely. So, like I said, I don't know, what it means for us. We don't seem to learn our lessons like a lot of, great powers in the world. We had to learn it in Vietnam, and then we sort of were modest for a while. And then the first Gulf War sort of reinvigorated Americans and said, oh, okay, we won the Cold War, and we're now the greatest power in the world. And I firmly believe that 9/11 was even more devastating because those of us who are old enough to remember, the 1990s I consider to be possibly the last great decade in American history. Crime went down significantly. Wages went up. Unemployment went down. I mean, it was a really great decade. I mean, the introduction of what we enjoy today in terms of modern technology, the internet, and personal computers, and all this sort of thing. And then came 9/11. And it all came crashing down. The party came to an end. So it wasn't just it was just an average decade. It was a really good decade. And then 9/11 happens, and everything changes. We go to war, and then of course you had the economic crash, 2009, the worst in a generation since really the Great Depression. And then of course that takes us into the presidency of Barack Obama. I think heading in the right direction. But of course that invariably leads us to the presidency of Donald Trump, because that's part of the backlash of the election of Barack Obama, who, of course, won in no small part because people were disillusioned with the leadership of the Republican Party in terms of the wars and the economy and so forth. So all of these things are connected. We get to exactly where we are today by going back to that day.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. You did a much better opening than I would have done. I appreciate the thoughts, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Spot on. I mean, it's exactly the thoughts right there. Let's go to real quick. Let's get Alice on line 2. Alice, how you doing today?
I'm insane as usual. I remember 9/11 very well, and I had worked the night before a night shift, and my mother called me at like 10 till 9 in the morning, and my mother was starting to go into dementia, and she was like, she's telling me, she had woke me up, and she was telling me, and I thought she was just like hallucinating again. And then my son got on the phone, and he was like, no, Mom, it happened. So I turned the TV on, and I remember that entire day. I worked day shift, and we had the television on. And I remember later that evening, the roads were just completely dead. And one of my customers, his son, was working in the towers.
Oh my God.
And it wasn't until like 2 days later that he found out that his son was alive. And it was just, imagine. I remember how everyone just pulled together. So, and the thing is, what a lot of people conveniently forget, I think it was 15 or 16 of the terrorists were Saudi Arabians.
Yep.
It wasn't Afghanis.
Yeah.
It was Saudi Arabia. But there you are.
There you go.
So
Thanks,
you have
Alice.
a good evening, Rick. Oh, and check your email.
Will do. That's the other part. And again, I go back to Trump with the orbs and Kushner with the $2 billion. You kind of got to wonder. Let's go to Julie in Minnesota on line 3. Julie, how are you?
Hi, I just heard you the last several minutes. She is so right. We have to tell the younger generation that's been born since 9/11 that we went after the wrong people. We got the Saudi Arabian family out of the United States. on the evening that 9/11 happened, and we went after the wrong people, and we have to let the newer generation know about that. You know, I had a relative that was in the CIA for about 35 years, and he retired about the time, a little shortly after 9/11, but he still worked for the CIA independently. He was not an agent. He was a little further up the line. He's passed now, so I feel like I can talk about this. I asked him, do you think we should go into Iraq? And right away he said, no, I'm more concerned about North Korea. And I was kind of surprised because I'll tell you something, Rick. This was the most conservative man you can imagine, born in a small town in the upper Midwest. He and his family always voted Republican, but he didn't hesitate a minute. He thought going into, he didn't actually, criticize the president, but he said, no, we shouldn't be going in there. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. I'll just say one more thing. My car was stolen the night of 9/11 because there were such rumors about gas prices spiking. And I think that I went over to my mother's apartment building, and I think that's the reason my car was stolen. People just, some people in Minneapolis just panicked. They just freaked out.
Was it just Minneapolis?
Expected gas prices.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the call, Julie. I appreciate it. Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much. No, I mean, having your car stolen on that night, again, something else to remember. But, it's an interesting thing she brings up there. Because I've known people over the years, who are in the intelligence world who are like, no reason to go into Iraq. You had Iraq. You had our installed tin pot dictator keeping rule of that region. And again, it comes back to our not understanding. And look, I didn't either understand that Iraq is really like 3 different countries with 3 different complete cultures and all this stuff where it would be chaos if you took that strong man out of there. This idea that we're going to impose democracy on an area that's never had it is kind of, arrogant. But it was never about that. As it was explained to me, it was about the money. Which is why we, every September 11th, the call is open up the records. Let us all see what was presented to Congress. Rumsfeld's dead. Most of the people who Bush sent in to do this stuff are gone. Open up what was shown to our elected leaders. And I've been told, and in a little bit, I'm sure we're going to have one of those people tell me the same thing again, that if I was shown what he was shown, I would have gone along with it. He can't tell me what he was shown because it's sealed. So for the younger generation, the call is open up those records so that we get to see what happened and make sure it never happens again, which is why I'm a big supporter of transparency in government so that we're not fooled again. Now, on going into Iraq, I was never fooled. Never bought the aluminum tubes, never bought the cartoon drawings of mobile labs. Look, I knew Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And everyone did, because we gave them to him. He was our tin pot dictator. We put him there. But you could argue, had a lot to do with money and a lot to do with oil. If you remember, Operation Iraqi Liberation. Oil. That was the original operational name for it before they turned it into Operation Iraqi Freedom. Oops on that one. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2001. We pause to remember those who died in the 9/11 attacks. Of those killed, nearly a quarter were union people. Hundreds of firefighters were lost, dozens of building tradespeople, and many other unions lost members as well, including the AFT, SEIU, Unite Here, CWA, and AFSCME. Those lost that day will remain firmly forever in our memories. What is less well known is the number of those first responders who are suffering from chronic and fatal diseases related to 9/11 or those who have already died. It is estimated that over 400,000 people were exposed to World Trade Center contaminants. These include more than 70 carcinogens and other hazardous substances. Of those exposed, over 91,000 were first responders. As of June 2017, over 67,000 first responders and over 12,000 survivors had registered in the World Trade Center Health Program run by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The program provides medical monitoring, health evaluations, and treatment for those who qualify. Of those registered responders still alive, more than 45,000 suffer from certified conditions as defined by the Zadroga Act of 2010. And for registered survivors, nearly 10,000 suffer from certified conditions. Close to 700 registered first responders have already died from certified conditions. However, this number is considered a low estimate given that there were many who died before the program was established. There are also a number of illnesses believed related to the attacks but not yet certified. If you are a survivor or were a 9/11 first responder and would like to enroll in the World Trade Center Health Program, please visit cdc.gov/WTC or call toll-free 1-888-982-4748.
Last week, I talked about how Labor Day was created in the 1880s by rebellious workers. But I'm celebrating the spirit again this week because a momentous new energy has been building in today's union movement. Indeed, renewed union rebelliousness has put labor back in Labor Day. Previously cast as a day off, it's now a day on, rallying working-class activism and celebrating nationwide strikes by such disparate groups as Teamsters and Hollywood actors. This is making the corporate bosses very antsy, for it's the harbinger of a new order that is undermining absolutist boss rule. Particularly alarming to the plutocratic establishment is the new aggressiveness of the United Auto Workers Union under their recently elected grassroots president, Shawn Fain. Tossing aside the old willingness to accept incremental changes in contract negotiations, Fain began the current bargaining round by literally throwing the industry's proposal in the wastebasket, bluntly declaring that's where it belongs. Such honesty has spooked Detroit's auto barons, who are wailing that the workers' demands are, quote, excessive. This from pampered CEOs, each pocketing between $20 and $34 million a year in personal pay. Pathetically, the corporate establishment has no better retort to Fain than to try its tired old Red Scare bugaboo. This man studied Trotsky, squealed one squeamish corporatist on TV. No. Instead, Shawn Fain has clearly studied Walter Reuther, Mother Jones, Fighting Bob La Follette, Frederick Douglass, Cesar Chavez, and other American champions of economic fairness and social justice. This is Jim Hightower saying, the big story here is not that a president of one workers' organization is shaking things up, but that organized workers themselves are on the move, demanding economic democracy.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So evidently a group of 7 activists were arrested for unlawful entry into Speaker McCarthy's office on Monday. And of course, the right wing losing their mind. This is just like January 6th. They should be conspiracy. And this is where they're going with this, because this is what they do. They take these couple of people who did this, and now they're going to extrapolate into some huge conspiracy, because again, it's about both sidesism. And again, you look at how they use the system to attack average, everyday working people. And I got to tell you, it's shameless. Anyway, we're here to share some thoughts on his most recent article on just something like this. You remember last week we talked with Greg Palast about all the stuff going on with Trump in Georgia, and then the stuff you don't hear about a couple of protesters who protest Cop City getting almost the same, if not worse, charges under the RICO Act by the state of Georgia. Well, our next guest has written a new piece over at the Philadelphia Inquirer. So I've asked Will Bunch to come talk with us. He's a national columnist there at the Inquirer. Will, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick. Hey, thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
I got to get your thoughts first on, obviously, today being the anniversary of 9/11. Where were you? What were you doing? Thoughts?
Yeah, well, I was the writer for the Philadelphia Daily News who, whenever something huge in the world happened, I was the guy who had to write that story. So the minute the second plane hit the World Trade Center, which I just, it's funny, I almost never watched the Today Show, and I happened to be watching that morning, and that's where I was watching when those two planes crashed. The minute the second one goes, well, I guess I usually went into the office later, and I was like, well, I guess I'm going in. And we had a puppy who it's been 22 years, so now she's long gone, but a puppy at the time who we were training, so I couldn't go to the office without taking her out in the backyard for 10 minutes. And I remember that because I remember what a beautiful. Do you remember, Rick, what a beautiful day that was? It was the bluest sky I've ever seen in my life. It was about 85 degrees, kind of warm, but not too hot, and it was a beautiful day. And I'm out here with this puppy, thinking about in my backyard and thinking about the beauty of that and the horror I had just witnessed on TV, and how I was going to have to get in my car and go write about it. And yeah, I mean, it's just a day none of us will ever forget. And I wrote a column. They asked me to write a column 2 years ago for the 20th anniversary, and I wrote about that, what I just told you, and I wrote about how when I had to write a story, we didn't know. I mean, maybe there were a few whispered suspicions that it was Osama bin Laden, but if you remember, we didn't know who did this on September 11th, 2001, and we didn't know how many people were dead. People were saying it could be 10,000. There was so much we didn't know, and I remember writing this story saying September 11th, 2001 will be remembered, is the day that things would never be the same again for America. And 20 years later, I look back, it's like, wow, I said that because, and the thing is, what's weird is I was right? I mean, because I'm not always right, but I was right that time but like I said in that column, we didn't know how things wouldn't be the same. Like, it's weird because 9/11, I think, for a very brief time, brought out so much of the best of us and the way that people responded. Both, I mean, certainly the really heroic people, the first responders, but even just the way everyday people all across the country responded, and everybody was outraged and unified with their neighbors. And it was the only time in the last 30 years that all the red, blue, Democrat, Republican stuff didn't matter that much for a few weeks. And then we ruined it, basically. We ruined it by using it as an excuse to go after Iraq, as an excuse to stay in Afghanistan for 20 years. And then we started turning against other people. People warned them when they created this Homeland Security apparatus, and sure enough, we created this, kind of build the wall regime against immigration. That was next, and this ties directly into what we're going to talk about with Cop City in Atlanta. But then the next thing was using Homeland Security and these other powers against dissent, protest. Yeah. Remember in 2020 when the Trump administration was sending these secret police type Homeland Security officers out to Portland, Oregon, to take on the people they call Antifa, and snatching people and putting them in vans. Remember that?
Yeah, that doesn't get reported on in the right-wing media. Never hear about that.
Yeah, but you and I talk about it, so that's good. That's something. So yeah, and I think the headline on my column was 9/11 was the day we knew 9/11 was going to change America forever. We didn't know how bad it would be. And I think. I think the animosities that were and the hatred that was unleashed fueled right into our current crisis.
I mean, look, I was in Cleveland at the time, and I remember, you were saying that it unified us. I saw it as it unified some of us, but it did pit people against each other, especially foreigners. And Cleveland is a very segregated city. At least when I lived there, it was. So, immediately there was an attack on a church there. As I remember, some guy drove up the church steps. There was a whole bunch of anger outleashed on certain communities, and that's what really began the whole, tearing us apart. And also, I remember, again, after 9/11, they rammed through the Patriot Act.
I was just going to mention that because
I went to a League of Women Voters debate on the Patriot Act. They had a panel of 3 people who were for, 3 people who were against. The people who were against actually read the bill, actually read everything. The people who were for it, well, they got the cliff notes. But I remember people just saying, look, I want to be safe. I don't care. Give me a national ID card. Let me give you my thumbprint. I just want to be safe. And they played on that.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy the things that happened. I mean, I remember my kids were in elementary school at the time, and, their elementary school built this weird security setup, because they thought the terrorists were going to come to this, elementary school in the Philadelphia suburbs, and all the like field trips that were canceled, and just weird stuff that we forget about now. And but you mentioned the Patriot Act, and to me that was like the first. That's when my mindset started to change. And I tell people all the time that that 2-year stretch from between 9/11 and the start of the beginning of the Iraq War, I guess it was less than 2 years actually. That period truly radicalized me. I honestly was a center left guy. I wouldn't say I was quite a both sides journalist, but my perspective on things was much different. And I to use the overused term of the decade, I mean, I kind of got woke right after the Patriot Act, and really then when things turned to Iraq, and particularly with the fact that the media, which I thought, this is the media that we created after Watergate to protect the country from idiocy, and instead the opposite happened. Instead, the vast majority of the media advanced this obvious, I mean, you could tell in real time it was a lie. And the fact that the media wasn't calling them out on this, I did the best I could from my little perch in the Philadelphia Daily News, but that didn't do too much good. But it radicalized me. It really did.
Well, again, you look at where we are in this moment, where again the media spends a lot of time, on the horse race and on all the Trump stuff that's going on, and yet very few people, if any. And last week I talked with Greg Palast about what's going on with these protesters down at this Cop City thing, being charged under the RICO Act and could face years in prison for simply protesting. It's insane. But there's no coverage on this that I can really find.
I've seen some because I searched for it, but you're right. If the average person isn't seeing the news about what's going on in Cop City, and
so before we start, what is Cop City, so folks know?
Oh, sure. Well, it's the nickname that's been given to what the government calls the Atlanta Police Training Center. So Atlanta wants to spend $90 million. Some of it's taxpayer money. Some of it is donated by this foundation that's funded by every gigantic corporation in Atlanta that you could think of: Home Depot, Waffle House, Delta, the corporation that owns the one newspaper in town, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which you'll be shocked to learn constantly editorializes and beats the drum for this police training center, Cop City. So they want to build this thing. It's going to have a mock city to teach these cops how to put down unrest, like the people who marched after George Floyd's murder. And it's fascinating. Just last year, I think in 2022, there was this documentary that not too many people saw it, but it was really fantastic, called Riotsville, USA. And what it chronicled was in the 1960s, after all the unrest, like after Martin Luther King was assassinated, they built not one but two of these mock cities to teach cops how, instead of trying to fix these cities, they built mock cities to show cops how to crush protests. And so it's not a new idea, but it's interesting. I mean, tying it all together with like 9/11. I mean, since 9/11, some of the things, first we saw the militarization of local police. These Army surplus personnel carriers.
Yep.
And
My little podunk town's got a tank.
Yeah, a tank, right? It's insane, right? Giving these towns the tanks, and certainly the riot cops who, um, I heard some conversation the other day. People were talking about the famous 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago and the protests there, and they pointed out that it was terrible. But you see the cops out there in just their blue shirts, and they have a nightstick, which is not great. And you look at the cops they sent out today with the masks and the stun guns and all the equipment, and it's just insane. So that's kind of where it started. Some of the tactics, like kettling protesters and arresting hundreds of them. I mean, that's been going on since 1999, the 2000s, and
with the battle in Seattle. I mean,
yeah, That's why I said 1999. That's kind of where it all started, I think. But then in the last few years, and really accelerated after 2020 and the George Floyd protests, you've seen states passing also a lot of stuff with oil companies and climate change, right? Where now it's a crime, now it's like a major felony to do anything in or around a pipeline, or even the trespass on an oil pipeline is like a felony in some states now, especially red states. But these laws where you basically have the right to plow your car into a group of protesters and get away with it. Florida, of course, under DeSantis, passed an extreme anti-protest law a couple years ago, and so what's happening in Cop City, there've been a lot of protests. One thing about this police training center is it's being built in a very environmentally sensitive area. That it's 85 acres of lush forest on the edge of Atlanta are being raised to build this project, and so it's attracted a lot of environmental activists. Call them eco warriors or whatever, but people who are willing to camp out in the woods and occupy this site and try, And so in January of 2022, January of this year, 2023, there was a confrontation, and a police officer shot and killed one of these eco protesters at the Cop City site, and claimed that he was shot at and it was self-defense. And there's more holes in the police story than in a hunk of Swiss cheese, right? And then around the time the state of Georgia, and there's the Democratic prosecutors in the two relevant counties haven't covered themselves with glory, but really it is the Republicans, Brian Kemp and this Republican Attorney General who wants to succeed Brian Kemp, this guy named Chris Carr, who earlier this year they lodged domestic terrorism charges against a few dozen of the protesters. Then they raided the office of the bail fund, that all it does is raise money to, when these protesters get locked up, they'll bail them out. Yeah. And they accused them of
aiding and abetting.
Money laundering.
Oh, wow.
Money laundering. Yeah, I mean, just insane. And so, I've been fascinated by this story. And in June, I convinced my editors in Philadelphia to send me down there for 4 days and report as much as I could. I mean, I kind of helicoptered in, I guess, but to report as much as I could. And I really tried to meet as many people from the community and activists and talk to people about what's really going on there.
Yeah. Now, we had talked with Greg Palast last week about this, and and he said, look, the local district attorneys, didn't charge people with this stuff. They charged them for the crimes that they committed, trespassing. If they broke a window, they got charged with breaking a window. The stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, the whole thing about civil disobedience is, I mean, you plan to get arrested. You are you are blocking a street or you're trespassing or whatever, and not nonviolent civil disobedience. And look, I don't know if you and Greg talked about this, but I mean, there have been some acts of violence in terms of not property violence, not against people, but there's been acts of.
That's what I said. If someone broke a window, you charge them for what they did.
Yeah, you vandalize a bulldozer or something. Okay, that's fine. But no, what they decided to do, and this was rumored when I was down there in June, and now they've done it, which is RICO charges. If you've been following the Trump stuff, you know all about Georgia's RICO law now, and they have a pretty aggressive racketeering statute down there. Well, it's being used against people in an environmental and social justice protest movement, are being charged as racketeers for taking part in this movement. And some of the quote overt acts, as they call it, that are part of this racketeering enterprise are just ridiculous. One of them was a guy signing ACAB, which stands for all cops are bastards, on a letter. That was an overt act. Somebody committed an overt act buying glue because apparently, I guess, they thought protesters were going to glue themselves to something at the site.
But here's the thing.
And this bail fund, raising bail, but mutual aid, collectivism. They define anarchism. And I'm not an anarchist personally, but I think it's a philosophy people can legitimately have and discuss. But not in Georgia, where anarchism has been defined as a crime, basically now under this indictment. It's really radical stuff.
So last question I've got for you on this, because I know some of my MAGA hat wearing friends are out there going, well, we should be able to build our cop city because we got to protect ourselves. We need cops keep us safe. And look, I support the police when they're not wrong. What do you say to people who go, we need to enforce the law. We need to have people who are going to do this. Why does this matter to the red hats that we're prosecuting people under the RICO Act for protesting?
Yeah, well, the big thing, and in the long story I wrote back in June about Cop City, I got into this a lot, which is that, well, first of all, I mean, there are much less expensive and more reasonable options. I mean, this 90 million thing is kind of a Taj Mahal type thing, and it's a matter of civic priorities. Atlanta is maybe the most gentrified city in America. They've seen their black population in just a short time go from 62% to 47% because working class black people are being driven out of Atlanta. And this isn't just any city. This is Martin Luther King's city. This is the cradle of the civil rights movement. And black people are being driven out, and it's a matter of resources. The resources that could be used to help neighborhoods, help people stay in their homes, and give people opportunities where they live with social programs is instead being spent on police and this Taj Mahal. So yeah, people want to stop it. I mean, I want a certain kind of better police training. I want them trained to be part of their community. I want them to be trained to not
to de-escalate.
To not be an occupying army, but to see themselves as people who are there to serve the community and not to lock up the community. But there's no evidence that Cop City would be that type of facility. That it would further the kind of warrior cop policing that's been so detrimental.
That we've seen on TV so much. The article, Georgia Criminalizes Post-George Floyd Protests in a New Blow to Democracy, written by Will Bunch. We'll get links out on social media how you can take a look at that. Will, as always, fabulous stuff. I appreciate you taking some time, keeping us informed and up to date.
Oh, Rick, thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Good stuff. Thanks so much, our good friend Will Bunch. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show for working people. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. This day in labor history, the year was 1851. That was the day that a Maryland planter named Edward Gorsuch was killed in Christiana, Pennsylvania. Gorsuch had come to Pennsylvania to try and recapture 3 black men that had escaped from slavery on his farm outside of Baltimore 2 years earlier. A year after the men escaped, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act. This penalized helping those who had escaped slavery with a $1,000 fine and up to 6 months in jail. Emboldened by the law, slave catchers chased those who had made the journey to freedom in the north. Gorsuch received news that the men he was looking for were in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. 2 of the escaped slaves were at the farm of William Parker, a black man who had also escaped slavery in Maryland. Located just north of the Mason-Dixon line, Lancaster had a well-established underground railroad network. An armed black self-defense group had developed to stand against the slave catchers. Gorsuch and his son gathered a group of men and headed north. At the Parker farm, they were confronted by a group of at least 50 black men armed with guns and pitchforks. Gorsuch refused to leave, and a gun battle erupted. Gorsuch was shot and killed in the exchange of fire. Parker, his family, and the 3 formerly enslaved men fled to Canada. 38 others who were there that day were charged with treason for taking part in the confrontation. This included Castor Hanway, a white man who had tried to defuse the standoff. None of the charged were ever convicted. In the South, slave owners were outraged that no one was punished. Tensions between the North and South sharpened. As a result, the country moved closer to the Civil War, the bloody conflict that finally ended slave labor. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So evidently lawyers for Donald Trump have asked the judge, Tanya Chutkan, to recuse herself because evidently, I don't know what cockamamie reason they came up with. She was a former assistant public defender. She was appointed by Obama. I don't know. Whichever one it was, that's what we're getting. Maybe it was because she was one of the tougher, sentencers on the January 6th people. Who knows? Now, here's the thing. This is where I'm talking to my lefty friends here. When she doesn't recuse herself, and she shouldn't, and should just throw this out, if that hasn't happened already, please don't call her a hero. Please don't put her on a pedestal. Don't call her brave. Don't do any of those things. This is a judge doing their job. Let's not elevate this stuff to make them social media stars or build them up in any way. They're doing their job. Give them credit for standing up in the face of adversity, for doing their job. But I don't foresee this happening. Now again, I'm no legal expert, but I just don't foresee it happening. Also, you remember that whole Elon Musk thing? How Musk said that he was buying up Twitter, so that we can have free speech and all that. And then, free speech, it charges people $5.99. Free speech, only $5.99 to get a check mark. Evidently, the ex who is now formerly known as Twitter, evidently has been throttling back people looking for the New York Times stuff. Now remember, wasn't supposed to be this way. Weren't picking winners and losers. Was opening free speech. We also heard over the weekend that Musk shut down Starlink in Ukraine, which evidently the Ukrainian military was trying to use a drone to hit a Russian ship. Shut it down because he didn't want things to get worse. This is what happens when you give billionaires this kind of power. When's he coming for you?
We are moving out of society's comfort zone.
Earth just had its hottest summer ever recorded.
Tourists have been trapped on the island, unable to leave.
Extreme storms caused deadly floods in Brazil and Greece. Plus, Biden administration moves to block oil drilling in Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Again.
Again?
Again.
All of those deja vus and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
People are not affecting climate change. You're going to tell me that back in the Ice Age, how much tax...
KCAA Loma Linda. The Legacy KCAA 1050 AM and Express 106.5 FM.
NBC News Radio, I'm Michael Kastner. An impeachment inquiry into President Biden is expected to be endorsed by House Speaker Kevin McCarthy this week. Reports say McCarthy plans to tell House Republicans during a closed-door meeting Thursday it's a logical step of the ongoing investigations into the Biden family. Former President Trump is trying to have his charges in the Georgia election interference case dropped. His attorney filed paperwork yesterday asking to dismiss state charges in Trump's racketeering case. He's accused of trying to overturn the state's results of the 2020 presidential election. Pennsylvania police are still trying to find escaped killer Danielo Cavalcante, who's been on the run for nearly 2 weeks. State Police Lieutenant Colonel George Bivens said Cavalcante was seen recently breaking into a home.
A call was received from a resident indicating a short Hispanic male, no shirt, and wearing dark pants, had entered his garage while the homeowner was in it.
Bivens said Cavalcante stole a gun from a property before being shot at and ran out of the home by the person that lived there. Bivens doesn't believe the escaped inmate was injured during the shooting. He also said where they're conducting a search is a wooded area with rough terrain, making it tough to conduct a search. The lieutenant colonel said Cavalcante was always considered dangerous, but he's even more so now that he has a firearm. The Biden administration is taking steps to carry out a prisoner exchange with Iran to free 5 Americans being held there. Iran's president, Ibrahim Raisi, spoke about the deal through a government translator.
The arrangements have been done, and the final action of swapping the prisoners should be finalized in the due time.
The Biden administration has issued a waiver for foreign banks to transfer $6 billion in Iranian oil funds that have been held up by U.S. sanctions. Michael Kastner, NBC News Radio.
From the KCAA Weather Center, I'm Daniel Clark. This afternoon, there's sunny skies with a high of 92 degrees.